The Housing Development Board, or the HDB, was established on February 1st, 1960 because of a housing shortage, and it replaced the Singapore Improvement Trust, or the SIT. Before the Housing Development Board was set up, many Singaporeans lived in unhygienic and cramped slums and squatter settlements. There were only 9% of Singaporeans living in government flats at that time, so the HDB was formed to solve the housing crisis by providing lower income groups in Singapore with houses through producing the maximum output of flats in the least amount of time and at the lowest possible cost. Their strategy to combat the housing shortage was defined by three crucial fundamentals: the concept of a sole agency, a total approach to housing, and strong government support. The houses provided by the Housing Development Board was initially for rental at that time. After the Housing Development Board was set up, they faced multiple problems. Firstly, it was challenging for some Singaporeans as it was difficult for some of them to get used to heights and to live with lifts, which is totally different from living in a shop house or living in a kampong. This requirement for adaptation was more painful to some than to other Singaporeans. Many questions were also asked by social scientists, such as if people could adapt to living in public houses, and if they could, at what pace would they be able to do so, or what the long-term consequences of high-rise living were. Accommodating for the residents' cars was also a problem, as there were insufficient parking lots for the residents' cars. The HDB residents that tried to find a proper place to park their cars had to go round in circles for a long period of time before finding a lot to park their cars. This resulted to many people parking illegally, and because of this, many people were ticketed for illegal parking. Another problem was that many people were throwing litter down the windows. This was dangerous, as if the litter hit someone on the ground level, they could be badly injured. Despite all these problems, the Housing Development Board was still able to succeed in the end. After 3 years, the Housing Development Board had built 21,000 flats. 2 years later, they had built 33,000 more flats. And another 5 years later, the HDB had officially solved the housing crisis in Singapore. The number of Singaporeans living in government flats had increased from 9% to 80%, and the Housing Development Board now provides flats across 23 towns and 3 estates in Singapore. One way that the Housing Development Board shed light on enduring and emerging issues was with the CPF. Workers who were not provided with any form of retirement benefits had to rely on their savings, which were insufficient in most cases. Therefore, the CPF was introduced to allow workers to save up for their retirement days. Soon after, the government introduced the Public Housing Scheme, which allows Singaporeans to pay off their mortgage through their CPF. Another way the Housing Development Board shed light was through the Ethnic Integration Policy, or the EIP. The Ethnic Integration Policy was formed in 1989. This policy was formed to assist in relieving the social conflict happening in HDB flats. This policy allowed the total number of each race within a block to be fairly mixed. In some ways, the Housing Development Board tried to build upon the communal spirit of kampongs and move it into HDB flats through this policy. Ethnic cohabitation became the government's primary focus after the public housing issue was tackled. This was because HDB shed light on this racial and social issue that would not have been solved without HDB. One other way the Housing Development Board shed light was through the Main Upgrading Program, or the MUP. The Main Upgrading Program was launched in 1992, and under the MUP, residents enjoyed an improved living experience without needing to move out of their familiar spaces. The priority of the program was to garner support for the politicians. This program shed light on focusing the minds of voters on the link between upgrading and the people whose policies make it possible. This has desired results and has been used as a tool to garner votes for politicians. The MUP has been brought island-wide to 128 precincts and is benefiting 131,000 households. One more way that HDB shed light on issues was through assisting in helping the victims of the Bukit Ho Swee fire. HDB allowed all the victims of the fire to be relocated into flats, allowing them to have a home despite the destruction of their old ones. Before this, many people still did not want to move into a HDB, after all, the grants and price reduction. After this, more people moved into a HDB and helped in its success today. This is the end of our history project, and thank you for your time.